Hello and welcome to this Biathlon Integrity Unit interview with Judith Haudum on the topic of correct nutrition for biathletes. Judith is a sports nutritionist who has worked in a range of team and endurance sports and is currently the sports dietitian at the Olympic Training Center in Salzburg, Austria. Well, welcome. Thanks very much for agreeing to this interview, Judith. First question, I guess, is a pretty simple one. How can eating help you improve as an athlete?
Well, first of all, eating is important to get the calories and nutrients to stay healthy. And I think the starting point for every success is to have a healthy body, so you get all the nutrients. And I think this is the main role also for nutrition, to get what you need to be healthy, to be functioning.
There's quite a lot of controversy over food supplements in sport. Are they necessary, do you think?
They're necessary if you don't have a balanced diet, but for most of the athletes, they are not necessary. So you can really cover all your nutrient needs with the diet. If you focus on a well-balanced, nutritious diet, even though you're an elite athlete and you have loads of training to do, you're able to really meet your needs with food alone.
And that's even true for a sport like biathlon, where you're obviously consuming a lot of nutrients.
It is, but you need to have a certain knowledge. You need to know what more training means for your dietary intake. So you need to adjust your daily food to your training load. And if you have different training days, you also need to adjust your diet. And if you're able to do this, you're able also to meet your needs with food alone.
If you do decide to use supplements, what precautions should you take? We've obviously heard a lot about contaminated supplements and so on. What precautions should an athlete take?
I think the first step, if you want to take a supplement, first is to analyze actually if you really need to take supplements, whether that's a vitamin, whether that's a mineral, or even some ergogenic aids. Because there are a lot of ergogenic aids on the market, but the question is this one also useful in biathlon? So first you need to have a clear idea what you want to achieve and if this supplement will actually help you get there. If there's a supplement that seems interesting, or maybe you need a vitamin supplement, first step is to make sure that it is certified, that it is tested for banned substances. And if you're not sure, then reach out to people who know about this. I'm an advocate of the food first principle, but there are some situations where it's really difficult to meet your dietary needs, for example, with food alone. And whether that's training, whether that's also meals, sometimes it's difficult because you're in a rush or you cannot really use bananas in training, and you need a gel, or you need a sports drink, and you need maybe a protein supplement, and then it's important to look if this one is certified.
What are the possible reasons for athletes failing to improve despite regular and intensive training?
It could be, of course, nutrition, where they don't fuel their training as they're supposed to do. So they do a lot of training and kind of they make the check, okay, I finished this session, but they're not supporting the body, they're not fueling the body also to get to the maximum, to minimize fatigue. But more important also, or as important, is also the recovery. What are athletes doing after training to actually support training adaptation? So it's not just about fueling the training, but also what you do around training to make that next step happen.
So that leads us on to relative energy deficiency in sport. What is it, first of all?
Relative energy deficiency in sports is a syndrome where athletes fail to fuel their body so the body has enough energy also for bodily functions. Which means you're eating maybe 1,000 calories, but you would need 3,000 calories. So when you take those calories away that you need for training, there's no energy left and also to support the body. And over time, this leads to health issues and also performance issues.
It's an easy problem for athletes to encounter, isn't it? Because up to a certain point, the less athletes eat, the more they lose weight, and particularly in certain sports, the quicker they get, it seems, but at a huge risk.
For me, the question is it really just about losing weight and being as light as possible? There is still this mentality where athletes think the lighter I am, the better I will get. But there is no confirmation of this. So you get really susceptible to infections, for example, and you're not adapting with your training, with your performance to the training load. So this is, of course, a big issue that we have in elite sports and kind of in every area.
What are the symptoms you should look out for relative energy deficiency in sport?
There are many different symptoms, and this makes it also tricky to diagnose athletes with relative energy deficiency in sports. There might be some that have issues with recovery, others with sleep. In females, some they do have amenorrhea, so they lose their period. Others do not. We see athletes who have a decreased bone mineral density, but others, they're still fine. So there are a lot of different symptoms in athletes, in males and in females. So it's really important to look at various different aspects of the athlete, whether that's performance, whether that's health, whether that's also then well-being. Could also be weight, of course, to track it if they lost a fair amount of weight, to really make sure, and blood values, to make sure to diagnose it also correctly.
How can athletes react to relative energy deficiency in sport symptoms to prevent severe consequences, such as eating disorders?
Well, the first thing is RED, so relative energy deficiency in sports, is not an eating disorder. This is also something that we need to understand.
Right.
It could be part of the eating disorder, because those athletes that don't consume enough calories also develop symptoms of REDs. But if you maybe think, okay, this is probably an issue that I have and I'm not eating enough, it's important to reach out and also make sure that you're fueling according to your training needs. So reaching out to dieticians or also to physicians and do an assessment of the current situation, and then make sure that you fuel your body. So the problem is that you're not getting enough energies. First step is really to adjust your intake, and then to go back to a normal state and physiological functioning.
And I think you sort of touched on this earlier, but male and female athletes can experience REDS symptoms differently. Is that the case?
Well, there are a lot of symptoms that we see in males and in females, but of course when you think about the menstrual cycle, this is kind of an easy thing for us to at least to be more attentive and watch those athletes more closely when they lose their menstrual cycle. We do not have those in males, so it's difficult sometimes also to discover the problem and to see the problem in males, because maybe you're underperforming, but it could have a lot of different reasons why you're not performing, or you have poor sleep quality. It's not necessarily on the fueling, but it could be, and it could be a sign of REDs. So you really need to have a good understanding of the whole situation, watch your athletes. It would also be good always to have reference values. For example, when you do your blood work, to really know what the normal situation is when the athlete is rested. And then when maybe there is an issue, you can also look back and see what are the numbers when they are rested. Are they still the same? Is there a change? And it helps also identify the issue.
So is there a particular, red warning light you'd look out for in male athletes, particularly in relation to REDs?
No, I mean, if they're underperforming, maybe also losing weight, then of course, for me, one of the first steps would be also to analyze the dietary intake and make sure that they're fueling their training days.
Who can an athlete talk to if he or she thinks they are experiencing REDS symptoms?
I think if you work in the federation or in a club where you do have sports dietitians, those are good go-to persons just to talk about nutrition, making sure that you understand your needs that you have and adjust it if necessary. And if not, then a team physician is also a good one, especially those that specialize also in sports. Most of them nowadays, they do have also knowledge and they know the symptoms of REDs. And I think important is also this teamwork from all those different disciplines, nutrition, medicine, but also psychology, because there might also be some issues on the mental side. And then support the athletes as best as possible.
And for a lot of athletes, I guess, their first point, or the first person they might turn to is their coach, but there have certainly been cases where a coach is part of the problem, not part of the solution.
Exactly, and they might also not know all the symptoms or how to identify reds. But of course, if you reach out to your coach and you feel comfortable also in talking to your coach, the coach could then contact the sports physician, for example, and then you could start analyzing the whole situation.